Hello, welcome to Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and chit chat about intriguing and sometimes controversial topics through the lens of skepticism. I am Laura, and I have with me Richard and Josh, and our repeat guest host, Huck.
Hello.
Today, hello. Today we will be discussing microaggressions. So grab your English tea or your caramel apple macchiato and join us as we discuss those tiny little assholey things that you do that you think are not really a big deal, but maybe they are a big deal, okay? This is Skeptic Hangout Microaggressions. Dude, Puck, I wanted to clear that. I didn't clear the intro with you beforehand, but I was like, I don't even know if that's what microaggressions actually are. I
And you know
assume they're
what?
those little things that people do that they don't realize they're being dicks, but they totally are.
Well, you kind of just did one right now. Like you didn't tell Puck that he had to wait until after you said this is Skeptic Hangout, and you leave him out there to look like a fool. A
No, he's
fool,
been
Laura.
on before. He knows better.
I would
I
have
do the
found a
intro, everyone
way.
else shuts their mouth.
I would have found a way to look like a fool anyway, but I suppose a great way to start this would be to actually figure out what we're talking about when we say microaggressions. Now, the subject came up to me because there was an incident on Jeopardy, and I don't know if you guys saw this, but
I don't watch Jeopardy.
okay. So there was in Jeopardy, the answer to the question was Filipinos. But of course, in Jeopardy, you must phrase your response in the form of a question. So the contestant said, "What are Filipinos?"
Oh, instead of who are
Oh,
Filipinos?
instead of who are Filipinos?
Yeah.
Now, there's going to be a subset of the audience right now who's saying, okay, what is that? That's just grammatically correct, because if you're referring to a group of people, it's okay to use the non-personal, non-personal, what's that part of speech? I don't know. But it's okay to say what, because you're talking about like what are Americans instead of who
Hmm.
are Americans. But there's another subset of people who realize that dehumanizing like that is the first step to stronger and stronger aggression, hence the name microaggression. You wouldn't think about it as being aggressive or hostile or violent, but you also know that unchecked, it could be.
And it's not even necessarily on purpose, right? Like
Mm-mm.
when you're on a game show and you're nervous and like all the questions are what are this, what are this, what are this, because it's the easiest way to put it into a question. And then it's like, what are Filipinos? It could have been just a moment of like, I'm nervous. I'm not really thinking it through. I'm just answering the question as quickly as I can. So when you talk about microaggression, when you do something like that on accident, it can still have a negative impact, but is it considered aggressive?
I was just going to ask you exactly the same question. Is it aggression if it's not on purpose? That's a very, very interesting point that I think we could pick apart a little bit. Josh, what are your opinions on that?
I think microaggressions, what Puck was talking about is when it could be up to interpretation whether that was actually a microaggression or it was just like a common mistake. But there are microaggressions that like a lot of politicians are using right now, where they'll throw out like little words here that their in base knows, being like white power or some bullshit like that. While other people read that on like that's completely innocuous. You're taking it out and you're taking it to a whole other level where it doesn't belong. So like microaggressions can be something that it's almost an aggression that's hard for everybody to interpret, but their base a lot of the time knows where it's coming from and they'll respond to it. So I think microaggressions are always, when they're done purposely, but they're not always easy to read whether or not there's a purpose behind them.
Yeah, see, I sort of think of like because I agree with you. I think of like the sort of stereotypical microaggressions, like when someone says something offhand about a black person or under their breath about a gay person or something like that, where it's like, oh, it was meaningless. It was just a joke, or it wasn't a big deal. Or if it was so subtle, it could have been missed or interpreted as something differently potentially. But you kind of sense there's like some ire there, or there's some sort of negative connotation that goes with it. That's sort of what I see as a microaggression. And I kind of feel the same way about phobias too. When you talk about like say transphobia or homophobia, there's ignorance And then there's phobia. And when someone says something out of ignorance because they don't know, well, their intentions weren't to be negative or aggressive. Now, once you've educated them and they continue, like with pronouns, once you've corrected them 72 freaking times and they're still calling you she instead of he or they, now it's an aggression.
That's
I mean, I'd
definitely
even
a
say after the
microaggression.
first. Yeah. I mean, I think that's actually a really easy example because they'll even put that little like he, to kind of like emphasize or whatever.
If they do that overemphasize, I don't think it's micro anymore. Like
It's
that's
now
going
a
from micro to macro.
macroaggression.
It's evolved into you being a complete obliterating shit.
Now you're an official dick. Yeah, congrats.
So this actually leads to a fascinating question that I see. And I'm going to acknowledge, first of all, that I'm speaking on this from some level of privilege. It's not a fight that I have to fight, so I can think about it in an academic sense. So let's
Right.
put that asterisk out there first. And the interesting question that I have is misgendering a violent act? Is it an act of violence? Now, I've actually heard that said, that misgendering is an act of violence. I can see where the argument comes from, because there's a subset of people who will not be violent to trans people, and there's a subset of people who would be. And anybody who intentionally misgenders, we already know that that's going to be in that subset of people who would be violent to trans people. So it's an immediate sign of, if you respect pronouns, one of the things that trans people will take away from it is this is probably not going to be one of those people who's going to escalate and not going to be more violent. That's where I think another thing about microaggressions is this going to escalate unchecked? So at what point do you say, wait, we need to address this? Because another microaggression is like if I am talking to a coworker about another coworker who goes by they them pronouns, and the coworker I'm talking to accidentally says he, and I say actually they prefer they them pronouns, and the person I'm talking to says yeah whatever, right? That person's not even there. I have an opportunity here, though. I have an opportunity to step in and say, hey, no, this is not a whatever. This is a serious thing. They prefer to go by they them pronouns, and that's what we're going to use in conversation. But it's also the kind of thing that you could say, okay, we have other fights that we're fighting right now, and this is a work situation, maybe not the best place to get political. Do I let it slide? Do I not let it slide?
I wouldn't even say that's a political conversation. That's a respect your coworker, because that's going to get around if they're hearing that they're getting mispronounced by your coworker. I don't know if I'd say that's violence. I know it can escalate into violence. I hate using this because it falls under slippery slope fallacy, but I do believe that the more normalized it gets to be misgendering somebody in like workplace or pretty much anywhere, it can escalate into a bigger problem, and then it can become violent. So it's like maybe it's a pinch. If you're gonna relate it to like a physical sensation, it's a pinch of violence that can escalate into something much worse. So I hesitate to actually call it violence right off the bat, depending on the situation, though. But if you're in a place of power and you're misgendering people, then it goes into violence very quickly. So it kind of matters where you are on the power totem pole, whether or not misgendering people is in itself violence, because we have politicians that are definitely misgendering, and they're using and it turning into violent acts, and it's like radicalizing their bases by like even saying that trans people don't really exist, or they're just cross-dressers or something like that. And that goes into where it goes from microaggressions into big time violence, because they have power behind it. But if like and I don't mean to to put genders down on the totem pole, but like if the gender at the hospital is misgendering people, it's not going to have as big of an impact where somebody with like the head of the hospital is going around misgendering people and sending an example of how bad it could be, or what you can get away with in that facility.
I think we've got to I think it's very difficult, isn't it? Because I've historically been very, very bad for misgendering people. People who I know the pronouns as well, because of the way they represent, and my brain just automatically goes, female, male. And sometimes that comes out of my mouth before my brain's had a chance to correct that. And it's something I've had to work really, really, really hard at. Not just misgendering people either. I called somebody on air the other day on one of the shows I did the completely wrong name. And it's just because I'm particularly stupid.
It's okay, John. It happens to the best of us.
Every time, at every point I do that, I should be corrected. and I expect to be corrected, and I want to be corrected when I do those things. But I can see from the point of view from the people I'm doing it to how that may be seen as aggression. I can genuinely see it and how it can be seen as disrespectful. So I think having the conversation, what I don't particularly like is activists who, when a mistake is made, jump on it as though you're automatically doing it, as though you're being disrespectful, or as if you're being aggressive towards them. I
Right.
think that the conversation has to be had before the assumption is made. I think there are some circumstances where we can dispense with that. Like like Josh was talking about, if you're coming across somebody who's very high profile, who's got a certain agenda behind them. If you're
Mhm.
talking to J.K. Rowling and she's talking about trans people, you can be pretty sure she's already thought about it quite deeply and she's doing it on purpose.
And she's
If
already
you
gotten the pushback in the conversations.
Well, she also
if you're
knows how to
talking to
word it where
somebody
some
like
people.
me who's just particularly stupid quite a lot of the time, and I do it, you have the conversation and say, hang on a minute, mate, you've been a bit of a dickhead there. And I can say, yes, I have. I'm so sorry.
But that is the
I'll
difference
try
right
better.
there. Yeah,
And
that
I think, go on, sorry.
well, I was just gonna say that's the difference when you talk about like whether someone's portraying a microaggression or not. If you can correct them and they apologize and they seek to not do it, like we are so heavily culturally programmed to think certain things, act certain ways, say certain things that yeah, changing that programming is difficult. I have a character in one of the books that I'm writing that uses alternative pronouns, and I kept messing it up. And I told one of the girls, like I shouldn't say girl, she's a woman and she's actually a published author who's mentoring me. She was like, no. When I said maybe we should make it like a he or a she because I keep making these mistakes, she said, no, this is practice. It's practice for you. It's practice for
Yeah.
me. It's practice for everyone else who's reading your book. And I guarantee if you stick with it, then after the first like page or two, because I made up pronouns. So they were really like, they really sounded weird. And she's like, they'll get it once they've seen the pronouns written a couple of times. Every time they see it on the book, it'll become natural to them. She's like, this is good practice. And so that's the difference between like messing up because your brain is so like those neurons are like really, really reinforced. Like you said, if you present as a woman or you present as a man, it's so easy to say she, he, and not even realize you've done it. It's the when you're corrected or when you catch yourself being willing to be humbled and say, I apologize, like that just came out, I'm sorry, or like strive to do better. It's when you're doing it on purpose or you're not even striving, like maybe you did it on accident, but you're not trying to do better. And you're like, well, whatever, like Puck said, that's when I think it gets into the realms of aggression.
I still think you have to take into account people that are dealing with these microaggressions on the regular, and the fact that sometimes they may get sensitive about it isn't necessarily in the wrong. You sometimes got to roll with the punches when you've accidentally misgendered somebody. You do the quick apology, which is what we're mostly told to do, is just quick apology and try to move on.
Move on.
They don't have to be okay with it, even if it was an honest mistake. They don't have to like you might be in the shit with that person from now on, and that's because you don't know what they've dealt with. They may have been dealing with people doing accidents all the fucking time, and they're sensitive to it for good reasons.
Very good point.
So if somebody gets pissed off at me for fucking up, then that's on me. And if they don't like me afterwards, that's power to them. I'm not a very likable person, so they might have gotten off on. They might be doing better without it.
Your
Right, so
apology does not require an acceptance. Like you apologizing and moving on just makes you less of a dickhead. So them being angry or offended, nobody has to accept an apology. You should still do it, obviously. You should still apologize because it's the right thing to do.
As long as you mean it.
I think sure. Yeah. Don't make insincere apologies because that makes you even more of a dick. Let's talk about how many different ways people can make themselves into assholes today. But no. I just think you made a really, really good point. Like no apology for anyone out there who expects reconciliation or for the other person to just magically be better because you apologized, that's bullshit. That apology is for you. It's not for them. And if they choose to accept it, then that's their choice.
These are softballs. This is easy stuff that we've talked about: up, down, left, right, and sideways. So let's get into the really weird stuff. Let's think about the phrase "I'm proud of you."
Oh, I don't even use
Is
that
that
phrase
a
anymore.
because in Puckville, where I spend a
Oh,
substantial portion of my time, being proud of is something that you do down or sideways. You would never go to the president of your company or even your boss and say, "Super proud of you, champ." So if someone says, "I am proud of you," is that their little way of kind of edging themselves a little higher than you on the social ladder? Can you see where that might come from?
I don't even see it quite like that. To me, I'm proud of you almost seems to imply that you have some participation with whatever their accomplishment is. Because I like if I was to say I'm proud of Laura, I've done nothing to help Laura out. I have dragged her down as far as she can possibly go. And then she writes like a
and
good
I'm
book,
still
and I
climbing
go
out.
like, I'm proud of you for writing that book. Like I had nothing to do with that fucking book. I had nothing to do with her accomplishment. I'm proud of you seems to be taking ownership of the person and their accomplishments. Like, yeah, I helped with that in some way. It's something that I used to say a lot more when I was trying to congratulate my friends, and then I thought about the phrase and it doesn't sound right to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I tend to use the word excited. I'm so excited for you. But then I'm a really like hyper happy kind of positive person. So those kind of words kind of flow out of me. But but that goes up, down, sideways. Like it will be my superior and they could get promoted or they can get a job opportunity or something or an award. And I would be like, oh, I'm so excited for you. Right.
It's
And so
fine.
it doesn't even, I can't really, I'm sort of there with Josh when I think of when I say I'm proud of you, it's I'm reinforcing a behavior. So I don't see it as a microaggression necessarily, although it could be. And I don't see it as taking ownership, although I do see where it could be. Like those two things are like they could happen. But I think with proud, it's more like I'm reinforcing that behavior because I want that kind. I want to show you that kind of. So, oh, you finished your math homework on time. I'm so proud of you. Like, oh, you did this like art piece. I'm so proud of you. It's like this is good. I want to reinforce this because this kind of behavior is acceptable to me. And so to
But notice
me,
the hidden assumption there that it is for you to reinforce that behavior.
or yeah, yeah. But
So
I
you wouldn't
mean,
do that to someone who you wouldn't have a position to reinforce, like your boss is the easy
I would.
example. You would really, wow,
Yeah, because I
okay.
don't know, maybe it's just me, but I would just as easily, yeah, but again, it would be reinforcing a behavior. So if my boss did something that I thought was like socially acceptable, awesome, good, added some sort of value, I'd be like, "Wow, I'm really proud of you. That was cool." Like, "Whoa." Or I might word it more in the terms of like I admire what you did, right? Like as a
That's
mentor, as
different.
a leader, but I would still use the word proud. Um, and to me, that would still be reinforcing like I am telling a person who is supposed to be in this position of authority and making an example that I approve of their example. And so I don't know. Maybe I'm just really pretentious.
I
No,
think culture.
I think I'm with Laura on that one. I think I would say to someone in charge of me, in like a leader as well, if I thought they'd done something that was really an accomplishment, I think I'd say I was proud of you.
I think
It's
culturally,
not
that's how
something I've
everybody
thought
takes
about,
it.
I've just to be honest with you, but I think I would. I
I
think
think
I would.
culturally,
You know,
that's how
just
people take
thinking
it,
on it
though.
now. That's why I like coming into these things unprepared, because it makes you think on the fly.
Culturally, the proud of you thing does mean what Laura and Richard says, but if you think about it too much, it sounds fucking weird. It's probably because I started saying it too many times in my fucking head. But I also noticed that Laura and Richard, I don't know if you are, I might be the only one that's not a parent here, but I do think that you can take pride in what your kids do. So like if you say you're proud of your kid, you made those kids, you helped educate those kids, you can be proud of some of their accomplishments. You probably had some hand in it, unless you're a shitty parent. But for the most part, you probably had some hand in shaping them, but I had no hand in shaping anybody on this podcast or anybody in the real world. So probably you sounds fucking weird.
So getting back to microaggressions, unless Puck, you had something to say in terms of use of that word specifically, but
Not that one
I want to
specifically. I
take
was just
this.
thinking of one of my favorite shows, True Blood. And
Okay.
in that show,
I'm proud you could admit you watch that garbage.
It must be really bold. Yeah.
in 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 one scene, a vampire is pulled over, and the police officer comes up to the window and says, "Do you know why I pulled you over, boy?"
Oh, that's a microaggression. Oh, that's straight up
Yeah.
racist.
Oh yeah. But boy is condescending.
Hmm.
It is funny that boy is more socially wrong, where if you go that girl over there, it's less frowned upon. Like most people will interchange. I hear more girl if it's like a woman under 40. People are more willing to call them a girl, and anything because saying woman's too many syllables for our stupid mouths to say. So it's become like the cultural norm. But it isn't as infantized. I can't say the word, but where you make a person an infant in your mind. It isn't that as much as when you call somebody boy in the society. Although I do expect with feminism on the rise, I'm not against this. I'm just saying, I'm just notating that feminism seems to be on the up and up a lot. I do suspect that will change more, and there'll be less acceptance of people calling, hey, that girl over there, and you'll have to express that extra syllable.
Like how I just called earlier, I called a colleague of mine girl, like a woman girl. Yeah, I don't know. If a cop pulled me over and said, "Do you know why I pulled you over, girl?" I'd be like, "You're an asshole." Like that, it would have the same connotations, if not worse, than them calling a young man a boy. But I think woman to woman, we do that. I think we say girl as maybe sort of a way of, it's almost like how we're owning the word bitch. Like, what's up, bitch?
Well, like guys will say girl, and most people won't have a problem with it. Girl will girl, and they'll be okay with
What's
that
up,
too.
girl?
But
Yeah.
guys don't go what up. Well, some people might say boy. So it does
If they're
depend on the tone.
friends, what up,
I
boy?
don't speak in the cool lingo or anything like that. So like I just taught myself like, oh yeah, I've heard that before among people that have friends. So yeah, I guess that it all depends on the tone. But with a cop, almost anything can become a microaggression because of the power dynamic change. Just like we were talking
Yeah.
about, if your boss is saying something wrong, the power dynamic makes things worse. So like the
Hmm.
smallest thing from a cop can become a microaggression. Just
However, if you're convinced you've been driving right and you haven't been, then
Hmm.
that is something you need to take ownership of yourself as well. And I think
cops, no.
I think as one thing that's coming out of this for me, coming into this completely unprepared as I always do, is that it's always
Wow.
about context.
Yes.
It seems, and in every case we've talked about so far, context seems to be the key, and
Hmm.
power, the dynamic of power, and I think those things are all things that we should consider when trying to appraise this subject. That's how it's appearing to me so far. Puck.
I mean,
Well,
when
yeah, let's take it somewhere completely different then. Now, I've heard this. I don't know this for a fact, but I have heard that one reason that soldiers will find some pejorative to refer to opposing soldiers by is to make it easier to dehumanize them and therefore be violent toward them. Is there, if only there were people with military experience that we could ask about this and see if there's any truth to this.
thank you. I
So,
have seen Good Morning Vietnam, so I know a little bit
so
about
you're a
it,
pro.
and Saving Private Ryan. But I'll let Laura go with something just to ease us into this.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm gonna hit it hard. Like I can't tell you how often I heard. So we're talking about like dehumanization, and when I first got into the military, it was like the OEF kickoff, Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom kickoff. And there was a lot of negative Muslim stuff, negative Middle Eastern stuff. They didn't even have to be from Iraq and Afghanistan. They could be from anywhere or even look Eastern and be Asian or some other ethnicity. And there was so much kill them all, let God sort them out. Right. And I remember being a part of that. And I was like 18, 19, fresh into the military, buying into all of the rhetoric and the piss and vinegar, right? Of being in a pretty serious war. And we heard it all the time, like, let's just pave over Iraq and make it a giant parking lot and build a mall, right? And just absolute disregard for not just for the opposing forces, but for the people. So I think in terms of general military culture, there's been a lot of pushback and fight against it in the 20 years since then. And I have seen a lot of improvements. But when you talk about on the individual level, individual commanders, individual members, right? People just sitting around bantering or talking, there is still a shit ton of dehumanization. And I would even say it still happens to certain degrees among like intermilitary, like that person over there, they're trans, they shouldn't be allowed to be in the military, blah blah blah, blah. Let's get this little group together and bullshit and talk about them in the like break room or whatever. If the right people hear it, it gets shut down. Military policy, totally against it, right? Good commanders completely shut that shit down. But does it happen? Yeah. Like I think the military creates this sort of atmosphere of me versus you. On some level, when you talk about going to war, they kind of have to. And I don't really like, that's a whole episode in of itself. It's kind of messy, but the extent to which it's done, and the ways in which it's done, it's definitely, I would say it surpasses microaggression. It can exist in that sort of microaggression sort of realm, little comments here and there maybe, but I think for the most part, it's a little bit more overt and a little bit more nasty than that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's a subject I think that it's a difficult one, because on one hand, in those situations where you're going to war, or in any kind of team building, I think a little bit of banter is a good thing. Just look at us. we talk shit to each other all the time, and
Yeah. Except Josh, he's an angel.
And yeah, a beardy angel. Yeah, we all. I've only said that because I've just shaved mine off, so I feel aloof and above him. Yeah,
And lighter.
no, I think it's an important part of human bonding, banter. I think the problem with a lot of what comes under the heading banter is that a lot of it is microaggression, and a lot of it is downright bullying. And there's a very, very fine line in it. I think again it comes down to largely to authority, and if you join a group and you're trying to get into that group and find your place in that group, and people are downright bullying you, whether it's a new job or the military or whatever, I think that needs to be addressed. And it's kind of like we were talking about earlier with the trans thing. It's what the person feels is very, very important in this, and how they react, no matter whether you think it's okay and you think it's all right, because a lot of people do banter because they think they're being perfectly nice, and they think they're being perfectly innocent and not being aggressive whatsoever. But if the person feels that they're being bullied and that's expressed, that is the point where you should say, right, hang on a minute, let me reappraise my behavior. And I think again it comes down to context. I think in the military, I've had military experience, not as much as Laura, but I think it's obvious, and from the officers, it's a weird thing, because you get this. I don't know whether it's the same in the US, but in Britain, a lot of the officer come from the kind of upper classes or upper middle classes, and you get this. In a lot of cases, there's an automatic superiority complex from them. And yet, in some other cases, you get people from those backgrounds who were really switched on and will do everything they can to stop kind of any aggression going off or any bullying going off. And it's a really weird mixture. And I think it's down to the individual. I don't know if you found the same in the US, with the officer classes.
Yes and no. It depends on the force, right? So because I have a National Guard background, a lot of officers are actually enlisted, and then they get their education from the military, and then they get commissioned. So yeah, you get a mix. Like you get some officers that like they kind of come in off their college education. They did college ROTC and got an extra rank out of it, and they've only ever known leadership and only ever known being the one in charge, and they can be kind of like unapproachable sometimes. Like they just don't get what it's like to be that enlisted person. But I think in our forces, there's a lot more of the ground up officers as well. I would say like what I really, really wanted to comment on is something that you said about context and banter. And it's interesting because banter and microaggressions are two completely separate things, and yet there can be inadvertent or deliberate overlap, right? And it could be used as an excuse. Ah, we were just bantering. I was just fucking with him. Like he's just being too sensitive. But what you made me think about was like with banter, there's the one you mentioned where it's like I'm bantering to this person and I'm offending them and they don't know, or I don't know it. And then if they verbalize it to me, I can change how I behave. But then there's this other kind of banter where you're bantering to somebody else and you say something that offends this guy over here. Like, and I've experienced a lot of that where you're overhearing somebody else's banter and you're like, did you just say that? Like, really? Even if it's just something like they would say is totally innocent, like, man, you're acting so gay right now, or dude, that's totally gay, right? And they're like, I was just kidding. Well, I was just saying it was like goofy or whatever. And it's like that, that is unacceptable, not okay. Like you're making something that is good and valid and okay into something that is worthy of being humiliating or joking, right? Like you're not taking it seriously.
However, let me push back on that though,
okay,
because we can look at that also from the context of privilege. And if we hear two black guys using the N-word between each other, and as a white person we feel offended by the use of that word, you know, is that's kind of the opposite of what you're saying there, isn't it? And
yeah, but do you think that we don't have a right then to speak up and be like, hey, like that word, I find that word kind of offensive. Like I bet if I did, they'd be like, you don't have a fucking right to talk. And then I would be uncomfortable. Like I wouldn't know what to do in that situation, right? Because that word does make me uncomfortable, but only because it only has negative connotations. It can only be used in most contexts, like put people down. And then black people have now taken it and they're trying to like own it the way we own like a word like bitches or whatever, where you try to like spin it around. Like most of the LGBTQ words that we use today, like I use the word queer. Queer used to be an insult, right? So taking those words and kind of re-owning them. That hasn't fully happened yet with the N word, right?
Well, yeah, but there's still
it's
no context where two black people using the word is a microaggression to the white person in the room.
no, you're right. It's not a
So like,
microaggression. I'm just talking about can someone address it or not? I would say I wouldn't even know how. I wouldn't.
I
But would
wouldn't.
I feel offended? I would feel uncomfortable. I wouldn't say anything. Actually, it depends on how they use it. If they're using it as banter to each other and both of them are enjoying it, I'd be like, fine, you do your thing, whatever.
Again, that's with context. All the black
Yeah.
friends I've had that have used it, I never felt uncomfortable when they were using it, but I never tried to join in either. That's where if you tried to test the grounds, that might be a microaggression, or maybe that if they're friends, it might be a microaggression where they teach you a lesson real quick because yeah, you're not allowed to use that word. But for the most part, I think that's going a little bit into a different territory. I wanted to bring it to we were talked about military.
that's very unlike us going off topic.
And now you just completely derailed me trying to go to my other
Sorry,
subject.
go on.
Yeah. Feel bad. That was a macro aggression at you, Richard. We talked about in the military how they use othering so that they can go to war. We use othering over here in America. We're probably the best at it in the world, unfortunately. For when we talk about illegal immigrants, we want to make their problems seem like nothing, so we other them into, oh, they're illegals and stuff like that, despite the fact that a lot of them are legally coming in, seeking asylum, which is an illegal way for them to come into the country. And then I'll hear people talking about like, oh, we got to take care of our own before we worry about other people. You're doing fine. You're doing perfectly fine.
You have 3 TVs and a Ford F-150. Like, shut the fuck up.
They're coming from dangerous areas and they're trying to save their family. And you're like, oh, let me worry about myself. And the people that I hear this from the most are people that are doing the most well off. You're not the people that need to be worrying about people coming into the country. They're not taking CEO jobs when they come over there for asylum. You're perfectly okay. But I hear all those kinds of dehumanizing. They're just illegals, and then they'll also push like their drug addicts or drug dealers and stuff like that. Or they always point to there is a cartel in Mexico. I'm aware of that, but not every single person that comes over from Mexico is part of the cartel. And so they'll always like try to lump them in with or like they're trafficking children. And I even heard a phone call. I listen to Sam Cedar a lot, and they had somebody say that most of the kids coming over the border are just getting human trafficked, and they just pulled that number out of their ass because they could do that now. And like that's how they're dehumanizing them. They're making everybody come out as criminals, and they don't have any statistics. They didn't have anything to back it up. They just like it's been repeated in their circles just among themselves. So it goes from the microaggression within their own conversations into something that they're throwing out into the real world because they've heard it so many times that it became real to them.
Yeah, so that makes me think of a question, because most of the time you were talking, I was thinking those aren't microaggressions, those are actual aggressions, or like macroaggressions if you want to give them a snazzy name, right? So like when you're talking about like overtly saying stuff like those effing people taking our effing jobs, da 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 da, we should, and like they're actually like, I think that goes way beyond
Well,
microaggression.
it
But then
starts
it
out
begs,
small within their own conversations and grows into
yeah,
what you're talking about there. Because
yeah.
I don't think any microaggression just stays as like a small thing. It always explodes into something bigger. Even if you're just like being a little bit of a dick to your roommate, if you're constantly being a dick to your roommate, you're gonna have a huge argument later on.
It builds.
See,
Well,
this
that was
brings to
my
mind what there's a great channel that I watch that coined the phrase Schrodinger's joke, where how offensive it is determined by the reaction of the person you told it to. Like if they say, "Oh wait, hey, that
post-joke.
was really offensive," and you're like, "Hey, I was just joking." But if the other person responds to it in a slightly different way, it's like, "Yeah, okay, I know I have someone who's on my side when it comes to thinking
Oh,
about things like."
exactly.
So
Yeah,
that's why they call it Schrodinger's joke. I don't know if that's the official term for it, but it makes some sense.
I've
it is
heard that
now.
before, actually.
Yeah.
I think you're right on that one. And it's definitely like feeling out the group because everybody does something to do for feeling out the group. I test how far my language can go around people, like slowly sticking in a fuck or something or shit. And then if I am really in a good mood with people, I could just sneak in the C word. But I don't know if anybody here would have a problem with it. So I'm going to backtrack because I've tested the waters a little bit, but I haven't gone all the way. So everybody does it a little bit with their biases on how they speak to people, where their humor can land. And then racists use it to test where your allegiances are or stuff like that. So like, yeah, it seems innocuous at first, but people are utilizing horrible things on like a minor level to test the waters and see how people respond. You're absolutely right, Puck.
Add dog whistles to the list of potential topics.
So I want to like explore this a little more, talking about testing the waters, because um we talk about, like in the beginning of the show, we talked about stopping microaggressions. Like if someone deliberately uses the wrong or even accidentally uses the wrong pronouns, saying like, oh, actually they go by they, and the person be like, whatever or whatever. Like, no, actually it is kind of a big deal. It does offend them, you know. Um is there a moral responsibility to stop microaggressions while they're small? Like I had this conversation with a veteran, and like he lived in my area, and we'd sit down and have like donuts together on Saturdays, and he like got more and more comfortable with me, more and more comfortable with me, and then he's like, oh, have you seen that Elton John movie? There's gay sex in the Elton John movie. It's terrible. Don't let your kids watch it. And that was the first time he'd said anything homophobic or anything, but he had tested the waters with me with little like conservative remark here, Republican remark there, Christian remark there, and I didn't stop him because I'm like, those are his views. Fuck, let him have it. I don't care. But when he said that, I was like, I can't talk to you anymore. Like, we can't sit down and have these conversations anymore because your ideologies are like offensive to me. And like, I can't do this. Like, I can't pretend to be okay with those and just let them slide by and allow you to get progressively more offensive. And that was the last time we sat down and had a conversation. And what sucks is I didn't necessarily even call him out. I just thought that. I was like, whoop, nope, I don't, you know what? Him and I, different ideologies, no longer want to hear it. Right. And in hindsight, I was like, maybe I had a little bit of a responsibility to call it out. So what is your guys's, and you don't have to speak specifically to my situation, but what are your thoughts in general with speaking out and kind of like nipping it in the bud?
No, yeah, that is one of the places where it's tough. It's like, with one response that you might get is, well, you were okay with all this other stuff. Why are you suddenly putting your foot down now?
Right.
Right. So it's like if you had taken care of it sooner and discouraged that, then it wouldn't seem so abrupt when you finally say, we don't talk about Elton John movies that way.
I had a
Or
similar situation to Laura's where somebody did it at work. They showed me a TikTok of two guys kissing. I'm like, yeah, that's not gross or anything. It's just not my thing. and they thought it was like an abomination, fucking disgusting. I told them that I don't agree with your views, and let's change the subject. But it was at work. I couldn't like go on. I couldn't not talk to her, so I had to just like end the conversation there. Was as far as I was willing to go. And honestly, she never brought a conversation up ever again because it was very tactful about, I don't want to talk about gay people like this because I don't think there's a problem with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with it's difficult, especially in a work situation, isn't it? Because you've got to be in that you're kind of constrained with those people. It's a bit like being in a zoo
daily.
Yeah.
And it's strange being at work, especially when you're in a position of authority, because you've got to kind of, it's not just a case of you've got to make sure other people don't use offensive behaviors and words as well. And that's weird, kind of controlling people. It's a really weird feeling having to tell people what to do. I'm all for within reason. As you said, Laura, letting, if somebody has views, people are entitled to a degree to have those views. And I think on an equal basis amongst friends, there's got to be some certain letting it slide, as long as it's not too offensive or too aggressive or bullying or whatever. And but I don't know, it's a difficult one. When you're in charge of people, you've got to nip it in the bud straight away. And you kind of, you know, if I hear someone at work and who's subordinate, yeah, I'm really not authoritarian at all at work. All my staff just take the piss out of me constantly. But if there's got to be that line, and you know, sometimes you do have to step in and say, you know, that's not acceptable. You know, nip it in the bud there, and I've had to do that a couple of times. And I say I look at the staff who I'm kind of, who I control, let's say. I look at those people who, and a lot of the time as friends, and I've got to step in sometimes and say that's unacceptable, and you know, just think about what you're saying. Just think about what you're saying. That's unacceptable. I've even had the situation where I've had black guys saying things like racist comments to people, and I've had to say, you know, just think about what you're saying. You know, and they've actually turned around and said, well, I'm black, it's okay. Well, no, it's not okay.
Ooh.
It's not okay, because there are other people here and who might not be okay with it, and just think about what you're saying. And you know, and these are my friends as well as the people I'm in control of at work. And I don't know what I mean control of like that. That sounds weird. I don't know any.
But you're responsible for them.
Who I manage, who I'm responsible for. That's a better word of putting it. That's a much better way of putting it. Yes, let's go with that one. Who I'm responsible for. So yeah, it's a difficult situation. Look, we've got to wrap up. I think what I've taken away from this, coming into this completely unprepared, Josh. I think I've.
Oh, I didn't research microaggressions because I'm not stupid, but you know, if you struggle, that's on you.
I think it's all about context. It's all about power and power play. I think microaggressions, it's something you should guard for and guard against, in both within yourself and looking out for other people doing it. And kind of try and stop if you notice it, and it seems to be kind of underhanded, even if it's on the surface it's not. If it seems to be, keep an eye on it and maybe have a quiet word and the shell, like in the ear of the person of who's doing it, if you're in a position where you're comfortable doing that. Yeah, my take on it.
Puck, I want you to go last. So, Josh, what are your closing thoughts?
I got no closing thoughts. I thought we were wrapping up. Just don't be a dick.
Yep. I like it. Puck, what have you got to say?
I'm just happy that we got a ridiculous amount of content about it, and there's still so much to go to talk about. And I think, it's good to open up these conversations because it allows other people to step up and say, hey, this happened at work or with my family. It made me feel uncomfortable, but I didn't feel like I could speak up about it because they didn't really say anything, but they kind of said something. Now there's a word for it. We have the word microaggression, and we know it's a thing, and we know that it happens, and we can help these people feel more comfortable in saying, this has been happening and it's uncomfortable, and I want to find a way to address it before it becomes any bigger than these little offhand remarks or these little using just slight word choices. So I'm glad. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. And audience, thank you for tuning in and listening to us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the video. Check us out on Linktree, and you can find all of our stuff there. And jump over to Facebook. Let us know what you think. What are your thoughts on microaggressions? Have you had any experiences with them? I think that's where the conversation will be the most fascinating, is really getting into how people have dealt with them. So yeah, if you've got a story or experience, jump on Facebook and share it with us. In the meantime, keep questioning.
Interrogate your beliefs.
Stay skeptical.
Bye.